Libya, a mostly desert oil-rich country, has become a key springboard for migrants heading for Europe, and a source of international tension as rival governments in the west and east seek to establish nationwide control. Libya was under foreign control for centuries until it gained independence in 1951. Soon after, oil was discovered and earned the country immense wealth. Colonel Gaddafi seized power in 1969 and ruled autocratically for 4 decades until he was toppled and killed in 2011 in a rebellion assisted by Western military intervention. In 2014, renewed fighting broke out, with Libya split between 2 administrations, one based in the east, and one in the west in the capital Tripoli. The 2 sides signed a ceasefire in 2020, but political rivalries continue. In 2021, a government of national unity was formed in Tripoli with Abdul Hamid Dbeiba as the internationally recognized prime minister, but the following year the eastern-based parliament formed a rival, and rather similarly named, Government of National Stability. The continued polarization of Libya between these 2 governments claiming to be the country's legitimate rulers has complicated international peace efforts and divided their external backers. The rival governments' claims to legitimacy are rooted in their interpretations of unsponsored agreements on Libya's political transition, and the split was compounded by the country's failure to hold elections in 2021. On September 1, 1969, a group of rebel military officers led by Muammar Gaddafi launched a coup d'état against King Idris, which became known as the Al-Fatah Revolution. Gaddafi was referred to as the brother leader and guide of the revolution in government statements and the official Libyan press. He began dominating history and politics of Libya for the next 4 decades. Moving to reduce Italian influence, in October 1970 all Italian-owned assets were expropriated and the 12,000-strong Italian community was expelled from Libya alongside the smaller community of Italian Libyan Jews. The day became a national holiday known as Day of Revenge. It was later renamed the Day of Friendship because of improvement in Italy-Libya relations. Libya's increase in prosperity was accompanied by increased internal political repression, and political dissent was made illegal under Law 75 of 1973. Widespread surveillance of the population was carried out through Gaddafi's revolutionary committees. Gaddafi also wanted to ease the strict social restrictions imposed on women by the previous regime, establishing the Revolutionary Women's Formation to encourage reform. In 1970, a law was introduced affirming equality of the sexes and wage parity. In 1971, Gaddafi sponsored the creation of a Libyan General Women's Federation. In 1972, a law was passed criminalizing the marriage of girls under the age of 16 and making the woman's consent a necessary prerequisite for a marriage. On October 25, 1975, a coup attempt was launched by a group of 20 military officers, mostly from the city of Misrata. This resulted in the arrest and executions of the coup plotters. In March 1977, Libya officially became the Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. Gaddafi officially passed power to the General People's Committees and henceforth claimed to be no more than a symbolic figurehead. The new Jamahiriya, Arab for Republic, governance structure he established was officially referred to as direct democracy. Gaddafi, in his vision of democratic government and political philosophy, published the Green Book in 1975. His short book inscribed a representative mix of utopian socialism and Arab nationalism with a streak of Bedouin supremacy. In February 1977, Libya started delivering military supplies to Goukouni Ouaddai and the People's Armed Forces in Chad. The Chadian-Libyan War began in earnest when Libya's support of rebel forces in northern Chad escalated into an invasion. Later that same year, Libya and Egypt fought a 4-day border war that came to be known as the Egyptian-Libyan War. Both nations agreed to a ceasefire under the mediation of the Algerian President Houari Boumediene. Hundreds of Libyans lost their lives in the country's support for Idi Amin's Uganda in its war against Tanzania. Gaddafi financed various other groups from anti-nuclear movements to Australian trade unions. On March 2, 1977, Libya officially became Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. Libya adopted its plain green national flag on November 19, 1977. The country had the only plain-colored flag in the world until 2011, when Libya adopted its current flag. From 1977 onward, per capita income in the country rose to more than $11,000, the fifth highest in Africa, while the Human Development Index became the highest in Africa and greater than that of Saudi Arabia. This was achieved without borrowing any foreign loans, keeping Libya debt-free. The Great Man-Made River was also built to allow free access to fresh water across large parts of the country. In addition, financial support was provided for university scholarships and employment programs. Much of Libya's income from oil, which soared in the 1970s, was spent on arms purchases and on sponsoring dozens of paramilitaries and terrorist groups around the world. An American airstrike led by then U.S. President Ronald Reagan intended to kill Gaddafi failed in 1986. Libya was finally put under sanctions by the United Nations after the bombing of a commercial flight at Lockerbie in 1988 killed 270 people. In the 1990s, the government's rule was threatened by militant Islamism and an unsuccessful attempt to assassinate Gaddafi. The government responded with repressive measures. Riots and Islamic activism were crushed by Revolutionary Guard Corps. Nevertheless, Cyrenaica between 1995 and 1998 was politically unstable, due to the tribal allegiances of the local troops. In 2003, Gaddafi announced that all of his regime's weapons of mass destruction were disassembled, and that Libya was transitioning toward nuclear power. First Libyan Civil War and the Fall of Gaddafi, 2011. The first civil war came during the Arab Spring movements which overturned the rulers of Tunisia and Egypt. Libya first experienced protests against Gaddafi's regime on February 15, 2011, with a full-scale revolt beginning on February 17. Libya's authoritarian regime led by Muammar Gaddafi put up much more of a resistance compared to the regimes in Egypt and Tunisia. While overthrowing the regimes in Egypt and Tunisia was a relatively quick process, Gaddafi's campaign posed significant stalls on the uprising in Libya. The first announcement of a competing political authority appeared online and declared the interim Transitional National Council as an alternative government. One of Gaddafi's senior advisors responded by posting a tweet, wherein he resigned, defected, and advised Gaddafi to flee. By February 20, the unrest had spread to Tripoli. On February 27, 2011, the National Transitional Council was established to administer the areas of Libya under rebel control. On March 10, 2011, the United States and many other nations recognized the council headed by Mahmoud Jibril as acting prime minister and as the legitimate representative of the Libyan people, and withdrawing the recognition of Gaddafi's regime. Pro-Gaddafi forces were able to respond militarily to rebel pushes in western Libya and launched a counter-attack along the coast toward Benghazi, the de facto center of the uprising. The town of Zawiya, 48 kilometers, 30 miles, from Tripoli, was bombarded by Air Force planes and army tanks and seized by Jamahiriya troops, exercising a level of brutality not yet seen in the conflict. Organizations of the United Nations, including United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon and the United Nations Human Rights Council, condemned the crackdown as violating international law, with the latter body expelling Libya outright in an unprecedented action. On March 17, 2011, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1973, with a 10-0 vote and 5 abstentions including Russia, China, India, Brazil, and Germany. The resolution sanctioned the establishment of a no-fly zone and the use of all means necessary to protect civilians within Libya. On March 19, the first act of NATO allies to secure the no-fly zone began by destroying Libyan air defenses when French military jets entered Libyan airspace on a reconnaissance mission heralding attacks on enemy targets. In the weeks that followed, U.S.-American forces were in the forefront of NATO operations against Libya. More than 8,000 U.S. personnel in warships and aircraft were deployed in the area. At least 3,000 targets were struck in 14,202 strike sorties, 716 of them in Tripoli and 492 in Braga. The U.S. air offensive included flights of B-2 stealth bombers, each bomber armed with 16 2,000-pound bombs, flying out of and returning to their base in Missouri in the continental United States. The support provided by the NATO air forces contributed to the ultimate success of the revolution. By August 22, 2011, rebel fighters had entered Tripoli and occupied Green Square, which they renamed Martyrs Square in honor of those killed since February 17, 2011. On October 20, 2011, the last heavy fighting of the uprising came to an end in the city of Sirte. The Battle of Sirte was both the last decisive battle and the last one in general of the First Libyan Civil War, where Gaddafi was captured and killed by NATO-backed forces on October 20, 2011. Sirte was the last Gaddafi loyalist stronghold and his place of birth. The defeat of loyalist forces was celebrated on October 23, 2011, 3 days after the fall of Sirte. At least 30,000 Libyans died in the civil war. In addition, the National Transitional Council estimated 50,000 wounded. Following the defeat of loyalist forces, Libya was torn among numerous rival, armed militias affiliated with distinct regions, cities, and tribes, while the central government had been weak and unable to effectively exert its authority over the country. Competing militias pitted themselves against each other in a political struggle between Islamist politicians and their opponents. On July 7, 2012, Libyans held their first parliamentary elections since the end of the former regime. On August 8, the National Transitional Council officially handed power over to the wholly elected General National Congress, which was then tasked with the formation of an interim government and the drafting of a new Libyan constitution to be approved in a general referendum. On August 25, 2012, in what Reuters reported as the most blatant sectarian attack since the end of the Civil War, unnamed organized assailants bulldozed a Sufi mosque with graves in the center of the Libyan capital Tripoli. It was the second such razing of a Sufi site in 2 days. Numerous acts of vandalism and destruction of heritage were carried out by suspected Islamist militias, including the removal of the nude gazelle statue and the destruction and desecration of World War II-era British grave sites near Benghazi. Many other cases of heritage vandalism were reported to be carried out by Islamist-related radical militias and mobs that either destroyed, robbed, or looted a number of historic sites. On September 11, 2012, Islamist militants mounted an attack on the American diplomatic compound in Benghazi, killing the U.S. ambassador to Libya, J. Christopher Stevens, and 3 others. The incident generated outrage in the United States and Libya. On October 7, 2012, Libya's Prime Minister-elect Mustafa Ag. Abushagur was ousted after failing a second time to win parliamentary approval for a new cabinet. On October 14, 2012, the General National Congress elected former GNC member and human rights lawyer Ali Zaidan as Prime Minister-designate. Zaidan was sworn in after his cabinet was approved by the GNC. On March 11, 2014, after having been ousted by the GNC for his inability to halt a rogue oil shipment, Prime Minister Zaidan stepped down, and was replaced by Prime Minister Abdullah Al-Thani. The Second Civil War began in May 2014 following fighting between rival parliaments, with tribal militias and jihadist groups soon taking advantage of the power vacuum. Most notably, radical Islamist fighters seized Derna in 2014 and Sirte in 2015 in the name of the Islamic State. In February 2015, neighboring Egypt launched airstrikes against IS in support of the Tobruk government. In June 2014, elections were held to the House of Representatives, a new legislative body intended to take over from the General National Congress. The elections were marred by violence and low turnout, with voting stations closed in some areas. Secularists and liberals did well in the elections, to the consternation of Islamist lawmakers in the GNC, who reconvened and declared a continuing mandate for the GNC, refusing to recognize the new House of Representatives. Armed supporters of the General National Congress occupied Tripoli, forcing the newly elected parliament to flee to Tobruk. In January 2015, meetings were held with the aim to find a peaceful agreement between the rival parties in Libya. The so-called Geneva Gadames talks were supposed to bring the GNC and the Tobruk government together at one table to find a solution of the internal conflict. However, the GNC actually never participated, a sign that internal division not only affected the Tobruk camp, but also the Tripoli camp. Meanwhile, terrorism within Libya steadily increased, also affecting neighboring countries. The terrorist attack against the Bardo Museum in Tunisia on March 18, 2015 was reportedly carried out by 2 Libyan-trained militants. During 2015, an extended series of diplomatic meetings and peace negotiations were supported by the United Nations, as conducted by the Special Representative of the Secretary-General, SRSG, Spanish diplomat Bernardino Leon. UN support for the SRSG-led process of dialogue carried on in addition to the usual work of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, UNSMIL. In July 2015, SRSG Leon reported to the UN Security Council on the progress of the negotiations, which at that point had just achieved a political agreement on July 11, setting out a comprehensive framework, including guiding principles, institutions and decision-making mechanisms to guide the transition until the adoption of a permanent constitution. Talks, negotiations, and dialogue continued on during mid-2015 at various international locations, culminating at Skhirat in Morocco in early September. Also in 2015, as part of the ongoing support from the international community, the UN Human Rights Council requested a report about the Libyan situation, and the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zaid Ra'ad al-Hussein, established an investigative body, OIOL, to report on human rights and rebuilding the Libyan justice system. Chaos-ridden Libya emerged as a major transit point for people trying to reach Europe. Between 2013 and 2018, nearly 700,000 migrants reached Italy by boat, many of them from Libya. In May 2018, Libya's rival leaders agreed to hold parliamentary and presidential elections following a meeting in Paris. In April 2019, Khalifa Haftar launched Operation Flood of Dignity, in an offensive by the Libyan National Army aimed to seize western territories from the Government of National Accord, GNA. In June 2019, forces allied to Libya's unrecognized Government of National Accord successfully captured Garion, a strategic town where military commander Khalifa Haftar and his fighters were based. According to a spokesman for GNA forces, Mustafa al-Mejai, dozens of LNA fighters under Haftar were killed, while at least 18 were taken prisoner. In March 2020, unbacked government of Fayez al-Sarraj commenced Operation Peace Storm. The government initiated the bid in response to the state of assaults carried by Field Marshal Haftar's LNA. "We are a legitimate, civilian government that respects its obligations to the international community, but is committed primarily to its people and has an obligation to protect its citizens," Sarraj said in line with his decision. On August 28, 2020, the BBC Africa Eye and BBC Arabic documentaries revealed that a drone operated by the United Arab Emirates, UAE, killed 26 young cadets at a military academy in Tripoli, on January 4. Most of the cadets were teenagers and none of them were armed. The Chinese-made drone Winglong 2 fired Blue Arrow 7 missile, which was operated from UAE-run Al-Qathim Libyan Air Base. In February, these drones stationed in Libya were moved to an air base near Siwa in the western Egyptian desert. The Guardian probed and discovered the blatant violation of UN arms embargo by the UAE and Turkey on October 7, 2020. As per the reporting, both the nations sent large-scale military cargo planes to Libya in support of their respective parties. On October 23, 2020, a permanent ceasefire was signed to end the war. Thank you for watching this video.